Retro.
Hi, this is Claudia Gray, the author of several Star Wars books, and you are listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. May the Force be with you.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode is going to feature our discussion of Adam Christopher's Master of Evil. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely. Very easy to find us. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, as we just said, we're going to be talking about Master of Evil. This is a novel written by Adam Christopher. It's about Darth Vader. It takes place in the time period immediately following Order 66 and Revenge of the Sith. And it's really kind of about Darth Vader. It's about Darth Vader, although he's not our central character. He's not our protagonist in this book. But I don't know. There's too much going on to really give you a summary. We're going to be talking about a lot of things over as we get through this, but let's kind of hit up some non-spoiler thoughts with our overall opinions on this book. What did you think, Jay?
Well, like you said, it's a Darth Vader centric book, but not. It's kind of a Darth Vader adjacent book for the most part of the reading of this, and it definitely was surprising to me. And I know you felt the same way, that we thought we were getting somewhat of a different book than what we did when we first got going into it. And to me, this felt like a very lengthy version of from a certain point of view story. And, Adam Christopher has written a couple of those in those anthologies as well. So getting a perspective story from a different character, in this case, a Royal Guard colonel, as some people like to say, the red Crayolas, kind of thing, was very unexpected, but also I really, really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. And there's definitely some twists and turns in this novel that I did not expect. Some things I could have maybe done without, or I thought weren't necessarily central to the storyline and maybe didn't contribute a ton, but I understood why Adam Christopher, wrote those elements in. But overall, I enjoyed the book. Was it one of my favorites? No, but it was entertaining nonetheless. But what were your thoughts?
I'm with you. When this book was getting promoted, it was a book about Darth Vader. Right. And when they gave us a sample, it was a segment of the book right from the beginning when Darth Vader is bleeding a crystal, which we talked about on a previous news episode of this show. And so I walked in really expecting something more heavily about Darth Vader. Now, the book is about Darth Vader. However, our feature character is Halland Goth, who, as you pointed out, is this colonel in the of the Imperial Guard that the Emperor's got set up, of course, after the Clone Wars. And again, I want to stay away from spoilers for just a bit longer, and just so people, if they're curious, they can hear what we think about the book and they go check out themselves. But not giving anything really away. I think the reason for that is that Darth Vader is one of those characters where sometimes the less time you spend in his head, the better, in order to maintain the menacing nature of this character and wonder what's going on behind that mask. We all know who he is. We all know he's Anakin, whatever. But I'm thinking of like the different comics that feature Darth Vader. We don't spend a whole lot of time in his head. We see his reactions, we see what he's saying to things, but we interpret what he is thinking and how he feels about things by the way he reacts. And so I kind of can appreciate the challenge that Adam Christopher had with this book, which is again, Darth Vader's dialogue and such is it's a nuanced thing. You can't just give him lengthy speeches. You can't just have him talking on and on and on and on to people. He does that. He doesn't do a whole lot of that, and he's very deliberate in a lot of things he says. So I get why we feature Halland Goth. Besides, the thing is that it's weird to say this considering we're doing a book club about Darth Bane, and that's our protagonist. But it's kind of hard to have someone like Darth Vader as our protagonist in this. And that's why I think it probably was important to focus on Halland Goth as much as they did.
Right.
Yeah. And so, it's an interesting story. It, again, it picks up after the Clone Wars. Vader is he's not even really known throughout the Empire yet. This is something that they talk about over the course of the book about the Emperor's, he tells Vader, "You're my right hand, to what degree I'm going to give you access thing, that'll be figured out going forward." But this is early days of the Empire, and Vader is still kind of finding his way in this Empire and what it means to be the Sith apprentice and all of that. And I like that aspect of the book. But I guess I don't want to say too much without really getting to some of the spoilery details here. But any other thing, not spoiling, you want to say before we dive into a more of an in-depth discussion?
Well, I like the droid. So, you know me, I always love a good droid, and this book definitely does not disappoint when it comes to giving us a droid that has a little bit of a fun spin on what it can do and what its personality is and what its capabilities are. So that's all I'm going to say about TC-99 or nines for
Okay.
now.
All right. So we're going to get into a bit more details. I guess something I could have mentioned in the non-spoiler portion of this discussion is that this wasn't the easiest book to read or to consume, I should say. I tried doing the audio version of the book. I read like the first couple chapters, but then I was trying to listen to it like on dog walks and stuff like that. And I found I was having a hard time keeping up or completely comprehending everything that was going on. And I don't think that really had anything to do with Mark Thompson's performance as much as it just did is that there's a lot of nuance in this book.
There
And it took me in some occasions, like going back and rereading stuff that I just read to make sure I understood what was being talked about in this. And I think the other problem is with, as I was just talking about with Darth Vader being such a key figure, we don't really get into his head to understand why it is he's doing or the things that he's doing too often. We get relatively few chapters that are told from his perspective. It's usually Halland Goth's perspective or TC-99 second, and then a few other random characters third and fourth in there. But what did you think about the style of the book overall?
Oh, I'm with you. And I think the best way that I got through this book was doing what, I know you've called like the whisper sync sort of thing, where I had the Audible version on, I think 1.75 speed or something of that nature while I was actually reading it. Because as you mentioned, Mark Thompson always does such a great job with narrating and doing the voice acting. And have to point out too that Catherine Tabor makes an appearance in this book as Padme. So that was a lot of fun to hear. But there was times where I was a little confused as to what was going on, or because there were some things that would flip back and forth between I don't want to necessarily say memories, but especially with Howland, thinking about, okay, well, where have I heard this before? Where have I seen this before? And then putting the two and two together. So there was a lot of almost, I guess you could say, detective work going on in this as well, which I guess is part of what Howland was sort of quote unquote hired for by the Emperor anyways, is to put two and two together. But I like what you said, the observation about how we're not really getting things from Vader's perspective. We're getting the observation of what's happening. But then as the reader, we get to put two and two together from what we also understand about Vader. So I think that someone going into this book that may not have a lot of, I don't want to necessarily say in-depth knowledge and background on a lot of these things, is going to understand it even less. But then again, I do think it's very helpful to have some knowledge of some of that deep dive information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. This book can be understand, but you just would have to be willing to take your time with it there
Yes,
because
definitely.
there's touchstones that we're all familiar with. There are some deep dive characters that and references that you'll appreciate more if you know those things, but you don't have to in order to get through the book. But again, just there's also enough new things that even as experienced Star Wars fans that we are, I was just like, I don't completely understand this. This doesn't remind me of anything else I've seen in Star Wars, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that I can get through a Star Wars book usually pretty quickly because I'm so familiar with that galaxy and that universe. But this time I really had to be more deliberate in the way I got through this in order to fully grasp what was happening. And I'm not sure that
Mhm.
I entirely do yet, but
Yeah.
I'm encouraged to. I like this book. I don't want it to come off that I didn't, but halfway through, I was like, I'm just not getting it. And it was then that I switched over to just reading it, and then I started to pick it up a lot better. And I think I was
Mhm.
enjoying it more than I did.
Mhm.
Again, I don't know how deep into the weeds we're going to get on this, but there's some things I do want to touch on. The book starts actually with Count Dooku before the end of the Clone Wars, and he's been sent to this planet Deso by Palpatine to recover some sort of a Force relic. Palpatine doesn't tell him what it is, but he's going to know it when he sees it. And it
Mhm.
turns out it is this temple that's built around a vergence in the Force, but the temple's been buried, and he basically has to force torture the shaman in order to get the information out of him about where it is so that he can get it. What do you think about Dooku's appearance?
Well, that's another thing about this book that I think is sort of a below the surface observation is that it does outline some of the workings of the Sith in
Mhm.
terms of how much is truly quote unquote teamwork versus how much is being done to serve oneself and to eventually overthrow that master. And I think that this is a perfect example of that with Dooku in that, yes, he was doing his master's bidding, but yet there was also some motivation by Dooku to maybe preserve his own future
Mhm.
in a lot of ways with moving this temple. And so, but obviously it ended up backfiring eventually because, as we know, Dooku became very dispensable
Yeah.
to Sidious, which he never thought would happen. He always thought he was kind of above that.
Yeah, there was a couple things that in this prologue, that's this is the only place he play he gets mentioned elsewhere, but this is the only place he appears, is that he's been sent here, he finds this temple, he has it excavated, and then uses the force to pull it out of the ground, and he has this ship, which we'll talk about here in a second, pull it up with the tractor beam into the cargo area. And prior to this book, a lot of the understanding we had about Dooku was that he's this disillusioned Jedi. He doesn't believe in the mission of the Jedi anymore, and so he's led this confederacy. He's teaming up with Sidious so that they can establish a new order. And he really did view it as a partnership, and he kind of saw himself as being this guy who would be there to lead a new Sith Academy when it was done. The rule of two is going to come to an end, but he starts thinking in this prologue after he realizes that there's some power here for this emergence of the Force that maybe he doesn't need Sidious and maybe he'll
Mhm.
supplant him, and maybe it's just too bad for Sidious that he didn't come himself to discover this temple and excavate
Yes.
it here. So there is some treachery behind Dooku, or at least the potential for it. Now, I kind of wonder if that doesn't have to do with the Vergence itself and there, because skipping kind of a little bit to the end, this Vergence really kind of shows people what they want to see in some ways,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
it preys upon their desires in a way, and then it kind of shatters their illusions if you spend enough time with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tuning fork for the Force almost,
Uh-huh.
but it's also a mirror in what you may not want to see, but
Mm-hmm.
what you need to see. And that's the thing. And that's one of the things that was a little bit confusing to me at first was, as you mentioned, this vergence in the force and that it has these force conductive qualities and whatnot, is that I was thinking to myself, okay, is this something similar to what we saw in the cave on Dagobah or what we saw on Tython? You know, all of these different vergences in the force, the hole on the Last Jedi, you know, kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
that Rey went down into. But yet this was able to be moved and physically picked up as a structure and moved, but it still gives you like World Between World vibes. It was very trippy in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, you know, at some points, especially with Vader. And, you know, it was something that just shows you that you just don't play around with this kind of stuff. And yet the Sith just don't learn the lessons.
No, they don't, especially Vader. So
Yeah.
shifting gears from that, it's like, it's hard to like isolate anything because it's all so connected here. But this book, when it introduces Vader, he is getting ready to bleed the crystal that he just stole from Kurakan Falah, or he killed Kurakan Falah and took his crystal, and he's gone back to Mustafar, and he finds a different vergence in the Force to bleed his crystal with, and the crystal puts up a fight. We talked about this some episodes ago when we got this as an excerpt here. And he successfully bleeds the crystal after having experienced some sort of vision from he thinks it's the crystal putting up the fight. After having read this book and his experience with the vergence that is in the resonance prism that's inside the temple, I'm thinking it was the vergence of the Force itself that was kind of speaking to him through the crystal to make him see this alternate vision where he goes back and kills Palpatine and then kind of goes and tries to surrender Obi-Wan. But Vader overcomes that and says no and completes the process of bleeding the crystal. And then it's kind of like that vergence kind of accepted him at that
Mhm.
point.
Mhm. Yeah, and here's the thing with Vader, I mean, even going all the way back to Anakin, he's obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in this case, he's obsessed with bending reality. And
Mm-hmm.
he's always trying to reclaim what he lost. You know, obviously it's Padme. He's always been obsessed with Padme and trying to undo what he has done. And but the thing of it is that he realizes that it doesn't matter what reality he finds himself in. It's almost like, you know, Loki redoing all of the different, you know, threads of time. Padme's still going to die in every single one of them. And I think that that's one of the things that Vader has to kind of realize in this whole thing. But you're right. I mean, between the bleeding of the crystal and then trying to manipulate this prism, for Vader, it's always about that possibility that he could somehow bend it to his will. And it doesn't necessarily give him like hope of any kind, but yet he's constantly failing at these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, in the end, he in some ways sort of accepts that destiny and then just ends up embracing it,
Yeah.
you know?
So, yeah, there's so much to talk about here, and I'm not
Yeah.
even sure that it's
Yeah.
it's hard to do. So, what ends up happening is that Anakin slash Vader, he bleeds the crystal and he goes back to see the Emperor, and then the Emperor pairs him up with Halland Goth, and Goth is supposed to spy on Vader to keep tabs on
Mhm.
him. And the thing that we skipped over is that after Dooku pulls out this temple with his virgins in it, he puts it on that ship that can reconfigure itself, which was developed in secret with the Techno Union at the time, and
Yeah.
is under the control of a tactical droid, an elite tactical droid, unlike superior to any other tactical droids out there. And he basically sends the ship into hyperspace, and it stays there in place in one spot in hyperspace, which was kind of a cool idea. But then Dooku tells the Emperor that it was destroyed upon there was some sort of system failure, and when it jumped into hyperspace, it ionized and was destroyed. The Emperor, or it was Sidious at the time, was mad about this at the time, but said, "Oh, it's unfortunate. We have other things to do." And then, but now he's sending Vader back to Deso to look for this vergence. So it's pretty clear to me that Sidious knew Dooku was lying but just decided to tuck that away for another reason later on that.
Yeah.
And I get the impression that the Emperor wanted this vergence, but maybe he knew that it wasn't really anything that they were going to be able to use to enhance their abilities in the dark side, and it was going to be more useful in his training of Vader. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's almost like he was sending Vader almost like a wild goose chase or wild bantha
Mhm.
chase, because like you said, I think Sidious did sense the fact that Dooku was trying to pull one up on him,
Mhm.
when he did this all in secret, and because that's the way of the Sith. I mean, that's
Right.
how they are meant to be, is that the apprentice is supposed to overthrow the master eventually. And so for Sidious, it was all kind of a game. They're different chess pieces in the game kind of thing. And how ironic is it that Anakin, former Vader Anakin, was sent to spy on Palpatine, and now Sidious slash Palpatine has someone spying on Vader.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's, I think it's the more I'm thinking about this, I think Sidious knew what he was doing, knew exactly where all this was going when he sent Vader on this mission. So again, there's so many details to talk about. Halland Goth, again, we've already described him as this colonel with the Imperial Guard. He's in charge of the Imperial Guard. He's also critically ill. He's
Mhm.
terminally ill. He's got something called Kangel's disease. And I don't know that you need to know a whole lot about it, but it's basically his days are numbered with this. He gets an intense burning sensation. He gets these crazy nightmares. And what do they call it? The soul nitro is the drug that he
Mhm.
uses.
Yes.
And TC-99, the droid, is the one that administers to him because he's been altered by Halland. He's a standard protocol droid that has got a little cartridge reader that he can use to take advantage of other droid matrices and learn their skills. And so they're running out of this drug, and it's not the ability, the drug to control his bouts with this disease lessens just about every time he uses it. And the effect of the drug becomes minimized. He'll have another bout with this Kegel disease and the hot burning sensation, stuff like that, faster than he did the time before. But I think the point is, it doesn't ever come out and say that the Emperor knew that Halland had this disease, but I'm beginning to think he did know this, and he knew that Halland Goth was somebody he could keep tabs on, and he knew Vader was about to go off on this mission because Vader is obsessed with being able to bring people back from the dead or keep people from dying. He taunts Vader with that when he first on the mission is like, "Oh, you really like that story?" Of course, he's talking about the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise on this,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Vader's saying, "You promised me knowledge," and this comes right after the Emperor said, "You desire power. That's good. That's what a Sith should do. But you also want knowledge. Now that's tricky. I will determine when you learn the things that I want you to learn." And Vader finally talks back to him at this point, which is, "You promised me knowledge," and the Emperor force lightnings him for his trouble for saying that. But then
Yeah.
it's like he's sending Vader on this quest almost kind of to try and disabuse him of this notion that he's going to be able to bring back Padme on it
Yes.
and to
Yes.
focus on things going forward.
Yes, and he was always everything that we've ever seen where Vader's trying to, as you said, cheat death, try and bring back Padme or whatever, bring people back. Sidious has always kind of almost pushed him over the edge only to bring him back
Mhm.
in ways that are torturous. And it's very interesting the way that Halland has this Kangel's disease that he also is now trying to cheat death. And then he
Yeah.
figures out who Vader is. And then he feels like, oh, if he could figure it out, then maybe he can share his secrets with me, kind of thing. So there was
Mhm.
actually a point in the book where I was thinking to myself, could Vader have ever entertained the idea that perhaps Halland could be his apprentice? But obviously he wasn't force sensitive.
Mhm.
But, it's kind of this weird parallel between the two of them that I thought was actually pretty clever.
Yeah, because Vader has these moments of compassion in this book, where
Yeah.
at one point, after they go to Deso and they don't find the temple at first, and Vader, there's a shaman here that, the same one that Dooku interacted with, Vader captures and brings back so he can get some information out, because Vader believes that this versions exists, this temple still exists. But Vader lies to the Emperor that says, oh, this is just a wild goose chase. And then the Emperor calls on Halland to give his report, and Halland knowingly lies to the Emperor too. He backs up Vader. And it's because he's got this terminal disease, and he's hoping that Vader's secrets, or this vergence, that, this resurrectionist, this shaman, is going to be able to save him as well. Of course, he eventually figures out that there's nothing like that's going to be able to happen. But yeah, so Vader is again pursuing this idea of mortality, of not necessarily for him, but being able to bring somebody back, namely Padme. And so he goes off, and this is one of the parts I was getting confused about why he was doing so many of the things that he was doing, because he was there and then he wasn't. And then suddenly no one can find him, but Halland suddenly does. He and TC-99 figure out what nobody else can figure out, which is where Vader is. But I know what I was going to say. I think the Emperor had an idea that Halland had this terminal disease, that he'd want the same things Vader would want, but Halland's going to be so much easier to track than Darth Vader is going to be. Despite the fact, Darth Vader is like 7 feet tall in a full body armor and black and has a respirator that everyone can hear from a mile away in the situation. But Vader's cunning, Vader's sneaky. Vader's got, the Force as his ad leg. Halland does not.
Right. And at the same token, too, the way that Vader was personified in this book was truly all over the place. As you said, there were these little glimpses of Anakin slash, his old self, even down to things like fixing Appo's leg, for example, Commander Appo, which, quick aside, I thought was a really cool little touch, that he would still have a clone trooper from the 501st as part of his team. But as you said, they were kind of in transition, and this was right after the Clone Wars and everything in Order 66. But yeah, I mean, and then as far as Vader being portrayed in this, as you said, with Halland and everything, and the way that the Emperor was keying in on what, he wanted to happen, it's just the same old Sidious as always, pulling the strings. And
Right.
you see that if you pay attention closely enough, that it all unfolds to Sidious's design.
Yeah. What do you think was behind those acts of compassion from Vader? Because, when Halland finally comes clean and tells Vader, he's like, yeah, I lied to the Emperor for you, and I believe you. I want to serve you. I think you're the future. And, he explains that he's a dying man. And so he kind of wants what Vader's got. And then later, when, Appo lost a leg and now has a cybernetic one in place, and it gets damaged, and Appo's attempts to fix it are passable, but not great. But then Vader makes it essentially as good as new. He goes out of his way to do that. What do you think about that? I mean, that's a very different person than we see through, almost the entire, up until Vader decides to turn on the Emperor and save Luke and return the Jedi. I just can't think of anything like Vader did like that.
And we get those glimpses, like I said, of Vader getting back to Anakin. Life is always simpler when you're fixing things. And I think that for a lot of that, they're glitches. Glitches in the Vader system, so to speak. And that's where, when I keep thinking about the echoes of Luke and Padme saying there's good in him, there's good in him. And as much as Vader tries to stamp it down, and he does, I mean, he's very successful at stamping it down, as well as stamping out a lot of other people. I mean, let's think about the hallway scene in Rogue One, that there's still those little flashes in there, as much as he tries to push them aside, that they're just there. They're just there.
I guess I'm not seeing him as being altruistic, though. I feel like he did this. I think yeah, I feel like it was more of these were means to an end type of things. I mean, Anakin knew Appo, right? And so that's a useful guy to have around, especially when other clones have already perished there on the ship. So yeah. And, of course, what we're talking about is that Vader, and then independently, some techno union people who we haven't even talked about. I'm not even sure we're going to have time to get into them much on this. And then Halland and some other women from DSO, who we haven't talked about either. They all independently figure out how to get to this temple that's stationed in place in hyperspace, and they do. And they discover this ship, which was secretly built by Dooku. It's got all of this force conductivity. It's designed to reconfigure itself so it can handle whatever the mission is. In this case, it reconfigured itself so it could hold this temple and keeps it in hyperspace. I mean, the ship becomes a shifting maze throughout the entire thing as people are trying to get to the heart, and Vader's trying to get to the virgins there. And but then there's this tactical droid, Sarnath, is aboard. And okay, so there's the tactical droid Sarnath, but then the Cybot Galactica, which was absorbed essentially the Techno Union from the Clone Wars and has all the resources, is also a player in this. And when they kind of find out, when Vader is trying to figure out how to get to the ship and how to interpret the coordinates he pulled out of this is convoluted, isn't it? The battle droid headdress that the shaman was wearing that was spitting out the coordinates. He goes to the board of Cybot Galacta, and it's this one member, Jarvik Keel, that figures the whole thing out and kind of tells them where it is. And then they all end up there. Okay. Keep all this in mind because it's going to get a little bit more complicated.
Yep.
And then Sarnath is what Jarvik wants, this elite tactical droid. He wants to bring him back to their headquarters so they can essentially reverse engineer him and get all this information. It'll advance their profits. It'll advance the corporation. It'll be great. And so that's his goal. Now, Jarvik is also a bit like Lobot from the Empire Strikes. He has one of those cybernetic implants that wraps around his head, which was kind of a cool callback. And Sarnath is kind of been working in low power mode, just keeping this ship and the temple going all this time. But then he powers back up and starts to turn everyone and downloads himself into Jarvik's cybernetic implant and takes him over.
Yeah.
That was some horror level stuff going on right there.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Yeah. And I know I just said a lot, which details a lot, but there's not a lot of discussion going on there. But when all this was going, I was like, I did not see any of this coming at all when it happened. But it was an intriguing part of the book.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts to this because, as you mentioned, you've got this whole thing with the Techno Union, which I have to say, I thought it was brilliant the way, as you were saying, the ship kind of morphs itself and it was turning into these little mazes and whatnot. I would love to see that play out on a screen, can I just say?
Right.
And then, as you mentioned, you've got the whole thing with Deso and the shaman. You've got the shaman's wife and the daughter who end up coming along for the ride, and so to speak. And what I liked about that was the world building of Deso, and once again just seeing how the Force is portrayed, I guess you could say, in different understandings across the galaxy. As you were talking about with the super tactical droid, again with Dooku, it brings me back to the idea of Kalani. Do you remember Kalani? His super tactical droid that he had, and his ability to ally with the Techno Union and all of the things. But again, you've got all these moving parts that they're trying to, with Jarvik Keel and and this Cybot Galactica droid, and all these things like taking over. There's so many things that, again, if you're not keeping up with the story, you can sort of get lost in the between the cracks kind of thing. But it does make sense in the end how it all ends up working out. But it is a lot of that horror element to it, that it being taken over by a droid and losing yourself in the process. And that's exactly what ends up happening here. And then with TC-99 and his whole ability for learning these matrices, and then he gets taken over by
Boxer.
this boxer, and having this alternate personality. And the only thing that brings him back is his ability to rely on these stories, almost like it reminded me of the Star Wars version of like Grimm's fairy tales,
Mm-hmm.
where you have these different fictional planets and the things that go on. But that's how he and Halland were able to, it was almost like their code language, where they were able to communicate with each other. And then Halland was able to pull TC-99 out of that with almost like a safe word kind of thing,
Right.
So gosh, there's so much going on here.
Yeah. And we could probably talk about this for another 45 minutes, but I want to start working on winding things down here a bit and just touch on a couple higher things, high points here. So Vader gets, of course, to the temple. He finds the center, which has got this resonance prism crystal thing. It's like a big piece of obsidian, and he interacts with it. He tries to bleed it to take control of it, which doesn't really work, but he has a number of visions. He ends up fighting himself during this whole thing. And then an apparition of Vader. You brought the whole mirror thing, which was, and that we got to see that. There was this like husk like Vader wandering around the ship for a while. That was based on Vader's interaction with the crystal himself, and which is the versions. And at one point, so he fights with himself. His shadow self points out to him. I can't recite the entire conversation, but the conclusion of it is that the master doesn't make the apprentice makes the master, which was kind of, and I think that was insightful for Vader, which is that the Sidious is promising all this knowledge, but he's really absorbing all of Anakin's hate and fear and anxiety to draw like all this power on the dark side. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. But then he has that vision of weird things with Padme. The different, his appearance degrading, her turning into a Darth Vader type character. But at the end, she basically says that, I can't come back. I'm not here. I'm gone. And, and this is where you hear Kat Tabor's voice. I sat up straight when I heard it. I was like, really? They aren't having Mark Thompson read these lines. They got Kat Tabor. That's pretty cool. And she basically tells him it's not happening. Now, that won't prevent him from trying later in a different medium, but of getting back to her again. But yeah. And then to put a bow on things, this temple and the ship it's on all get destroyed as they get back into the planetary atmosphere. And Vader comes back to the Emperor. And as he's reporting on his mission, he pulls out a brick from the temple, chucks it on the floor and says, "Here's your temple."
Here's your temple.
And Sidious is sitting in his throne, and he just turns around and starts cackling and laughing about this. And that was such a great ending. It's like, because Sidious, like I said, we were talking about earlier, I really think he knew what he was doing when he knew that there wasn't going to be any great power that was brought back, but he'd just been lecturing Vader about the knowledge that he was going to give him. And here was this lesson, which is that you can't get what you want. This whole idea of bringing Padme back from the dead is not a thing.
Yeah.
And you learn that a very hard way, but it's a lesson that it's kind of one of those things where I can tell you something, but if you figure it out yourself, you're always going to remember it better. And I think that's what the Emperor just did to Vader.
Oh yeah, totally. And that's when it goes back to what I was saying about sending him kind of on a wild bantha chase, because in the end, he knew he was pulling the strings and he knew what the outcome was going to be. And as you said, Vader had to kind of figure it out for himself. But it's just so classic Sith, can't you just leave the temple where it was on Deso and study it there? But no, they had to take it and manipulate it and recreate it and distort it and and then this is what ends up happening.
Yeah. No, it was a good book. I don't know when, but I'm definitely going to go back and read it a second time. I think this is a book that's going to benefit greatly from a second read.
I agree. I
really liked Shadow of the Sith, which was the book Adam Christopher wrote that kind of it does take place between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and it's talking about that hunt for the Sith that Luke and Lando went on, and it kind of explains what was going on with Rey and her parents and all that type of thing. Good book. I read it twice. same thing. It was good the first time, but that one was a bit more straightforward. It was much more, and so, I understood it a lot better the first time, but really enjoyed it more the second time. This one really takes a lot more thought and concentration, and I think it will definitely benefit from a second read.
Yes. And like I was saying, there's just so many moving parts and it's hard
Mhm.
to keep track of a lot of it. But I did really appreciate, some of the new things that we got introduced to, like this resonance prism, for
Uh-huh.
example, and just the idea that here's just another kind of relic or crystal, if you will, that is very much along the same lines as a kyber crystal, where it doesn't necessarily focus the same kind of power.
Right.
It's more, on almost like a psychological or metaphysical scale kind of thing, which I dug that. I thought that was really cool. And this whole techno union ship, like I said, with the maze and everything I just thought it was like I was lost in the visualization, just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like this would be so cool to see, in on screen kind of thing. So yeah, I'm with you. I think a second read through would definitely be beneficial. I don't know when that's going to happen because we've got so many other things going on,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
put this one on the back burner maybe for another day.
Right. Indeed. Yeah. I mean, I would love to get into more detail on this, but it is a challenging book and so I hope our conversation has helped our readers decide if they haven't read it, whether they want to, or if they have read it, to kind of organize some of their thoughts about it. I'd love to hear if anyone else has read this, what they thought about the book and any insights that they pulled out of it. So we'll give you our
Mhm.
social media contacts and email contacts here in just a bit, so that if you want to reach out to us, make that happen. But okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of Master of Evil. We hope you've enjoyed it. We try and review most. We can't get to all of them, but most of the Star Wars books that come out. So if you want to catch our discussions, then make sure you hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice. And we are doing a very in-depth look into Darth Bane Path of Destruction. We just had the first episode in that book series. We're doing 10 segments, the first of which was last week. And we had a lot to say about that book. And I'm really glad we divided that one up the way we did. And so
Mhm.
you can catch that. You don't have to be subscribed, but it'll come automatically if you do. And then if you want to catch more episodes of the podcast where we are covering everything from the Clone Wars, our monthly movie breakdown segments, and Jay's World Between Worlds segments, hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice. You can go find all the past episodes of retrozap.com, all previous 997 of them, and some other great podcasts that are on the network while you are there. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely. So you can hit us up on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust, and you can always interact with us through DMs and things like that as well. We'd love to know if you've read this book, as Dennis said, what your thoughts are. You can, throw some things on your story, tag us. We'd love that. You can check out all of our Pinterest boards as well. And we do have our 2 YouTube outlets that are dedicated to all of our episodes as well. No video, just audio, but you can subscribe to both of those at YouTube and YouTube Music. And then we are just 2 episodes away from our big 1000th celebration episode. And we'd love it if you would drop us a line at podcaststardust@gmail.com to let us know what some of your favorite features are here on the podcast, some of your favorite episodes or memories, some of your favorite guests that we've had on, any questions that you might have, or, just in general, any comments. So once again, that's podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you'd like to do that, we need those by Thursday. So by tomorrow, please. And we'll put those together in our next episode. And then last but not least, we have our TeePublic link that you can hit up for all things Podcast Stardust. And if you do happen to pick anything up, please know that all of those purchases do help to support the show. So if you want to pick up a t-shirt or a sweatshirt or coffee mug, we really appreciate that.
All right. You want to go ahead and fill everybody in on what's going on with cosplay?
Sure. So you can check out all of my cosplay antics at my Instagram, which is jsnipscosplay on Instagram. I was going to say at gmail.com, although I do have an email address. So, and that's exactly what it is. If you want to drop me a line over there. So getting ready to gear up for Fan Expo Cleveland next month. So just check out all my stories and my feed for all the fun things going on.
All right. So, upcoming on the show on Friday, we're wrapping up this week with news. And then, as Jay was just talking about a second ago, Monday is episode 1000. So, we don't know exactly everything we're doing yet, but it's going to be fun. And we're going to have a good time celebrating 1000 episodes of Podcast Stardust. So, make sure you join us for that. Okay. Thanks for listening to episode 998 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the force be